Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's career webinar. This is River. I'm Kelly, and we're excited to be joined by Julia Rogers today, Global Sustainability Lead for Facebook. So thanks, Julia, for joining us. Take it away. We're excited to hear from you.
Great. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me. Kelly, just a quick check. Is my sound okay? Can you hear me? Great. Terrific. Thank you very much, everyone, for having me. As Kelly introduced, I'm our Global Sustainability Lead at Facebook. I want to just briefly mention that we have a lot of buildings at Facebook, and this job, it specifically targets our workplaces. So we have workplaces, over 130 buildings around the world that house our employees, and we have over 40,000 employees. So I deal with the sustainability that helps run our facilities around the world. I'm going to get into a little bit of how I got here, and I welcome your questions. As Kelly mentioned, please type them in the group chat, and I'll be happy to get to them as we go. All right, so I wanted to just start out by saying that I am born and raised in Pittsburgh, although I'm streaming to you from San Francisco, where Facebook's headquarters is. I grew up and have an incredible affection for Pittsburgh. My mom, who some of you may have heard on the call previously, she's a Carnegie Mellon professor of architecture, and my father is a law professor at Duquesne University. Somehow I managed to be a perfect intersection of law and architecture, and I ended up as a planner and engineer. So it's a perfect marriage between my parents' professions. I didn't initially know what I wanted to do. I knew that I loved the natural world, and specifically, I'm glad we got to meet River on the call earlier. I really was sure that I wanted to be a veterinarian. I thought that this was the image of what veterinarians do every day. And then I took it upon myself to volunteer to be in a vet clinic in high school. I wanted to pet puppies every day and make sure that they were just bounding, good energy, loving puppies. It turns out that's not exactly what veterinarians do most of the time. There were a lot of samples of poop that you have to analyze that are necessary for that job. There's also a lot of, you see a lot of animals in different amounts of distress. So I actually realized very quickly that I wanted to see the world become a better place, and that it would be hard to watch animals that were not healthy all the time. And when I realized that in high school, I started to think about the things that really engaged me the most. I actually went away from Pittsburgh for high school. I went to a small school in Massachusetts, and I started studying biology because I found that I was intrigued by the nature of relationships between natural organisms, and I was just drawn to the subject. I was also drawn to a lot of other subjects, so I didn't narrow my focus very quickly. I took psychology and sociology. I really tried to learn a lot about the world, which has benefited me greatly. It's not just a science education that I needed, although science helped a great deal. I realized that I was really interested in the intersections between subject areas. I thought a lot about industry and how the world works on behalf of people, how nature fit in that world, how people helped each other, and how the environment helped people. But I also wanted to make a living. So I thought long and hard about how many great volunteer opportunities there are, and there are so many, and they're really wonderful, but I couldn't be a career volunteer. So I thought a lot about what were the skills that I might need to really do something with my passion. Because it's one thing to have a lot of passion. It's a different thing to have a tool set that allows you to really dig in. Initially, I told my parents that I wanted to be an environmental lawyer. My law professor dad said, "I'm not sure that you do. Do you really love the law, or do you really love the environment?" And I said, "I really love the environment." And he said, "I don't think you want to be a lawyer then." And I really appreciated that fatherly advice because it meant I needed to dig a little bit deeper. What were the things that really made me want to work on a problem? And I realized that with that concept of the intersection, so thinking about how different pieces of the world affect one another, that I was really interested in holistic planning, and thinking about how cities are built, how buildings run, the operations inside of a building, not just the existence of buildings. And I wanted to think about how we could do that with less energy, needing less water, thinking about how do we optimize a system, and then how do we make it even better and more creative, and thinking about how do we make it so that you're feeling healthy and productive inside of a building. I couldn't have really known a lot about that though, and really put that into words without a bunch of education. So I did decide to focus in college on environmental science. I went in that direction because I knew I really ultimately loved working in the environment, even not knowing exactly what I wanted to do with it. So I kept my options very open. I ended up majoring in environmental science, biology, and history. It's a huge gamut. I really would encourage anyone thinking about the anything you might be interested in thinking about how the relationships of different areas affect that one thing. And in my case, all of that all of that knowledge has come into to help me think about the world in a broader way. I took my college degree and I got a position with MIT. That is in large part due to talking with folks that I knew in school and keeping my connections open. I actually got my new position by running into somebody at an alumni event. So just an absolute plug for keeping in touch with the people you know, because they will find opportunities for you, and it's very helpful. I went to a swimming team event that was post-college, and I ended up running into a friend who knew about this position at MIT. And so at MIT, they interviewed me for what was called a sustainability specialist. It was really a coordinator position. There are so many words out there that are just lingo. It's somebody who helps, and that was my job. But I will tell you that reading the description, I felt completely, absolutely underprepared for that position. I didn't have a specialist degree in sustainability. I knew about LEED by name. I didn't know much more than that. I read quite a bit before going into the interview, but I will say that I was not necessarily 100% qualified for that job. Luckily for me, the person hiring for that position asked if I was someone who enjoyed learning and growing, and I said that I did. And so what I ended up being hired for was to be a professional sponge, to listen to people around me, to learn from people around me, and acquire as much information as I could so that I could reveal those intersections that helped us get better work done on more projects. So I worked on the building aspects of MIT's campus. That means that I had to learn about mechanical systems, electrical systems, the transfer of energy, the use of water, very, very intricate and old 1916 sort of cogeneration loops for energy in buildings. Lots of really interesting work, but it wasn't easy, and I wasn't necessarily perfectly prepared, but I was willing to learn. I was willing to talk to people. I was willing to ask questions and be curious and understand that if I didn't know something, I should say it and not pretend like I knew the answer. So it took a little bit of learning to get to that point, but I was really glad for the opportunity. I grew up in that position. Really, I was there for 6 years, and I ended up being our basically the department leader for sustainability for MIT's campus. And in doing that, I decided I needed another degree, and I only decided that after I had been involved in that job for a little bit. I would really encourage anyone who's thinking about a second degree to get engaged in the field. Go write for the Rocky Mountain paper in Colorado. Go find out about your passion and figure out what tools you need before you necessarily decide what the next degree is. That varies for people in different parts of the world and in different fields, but I found it very helpful to wait and actually dive in and find out that I wanted to get a degree in urban planning and engineering. And that is how I ended up at Tufts University. Tufts University is a great school. It had a terrific program. It also allowed me to keep my job at MIT. I found that to be incredibly valuable. Even MIT would not let me keep my job at MIT and go to school at MIT. So I actually decided not to pursue an education at MIT, but rather to go to Tufts so that I could keep doing my job. And that has been a huge resume builder. I ended up at MIT for 6 years instead of for what would have looked like 4 years if I had left that job and just pursued my master's degree alone. Not a lot of programs can do that, but Tufts was willing to work with me on it. And I asked. I didn't make the assumption that I could make it work, but they worked with me on that. So I ended up with a degree in the urban environmental planning group, and then I took a second part of my degree at the engineering school. And that's how I got really comfortable in understanding building engineering. So the next part of my world for the next 5 to 6 years was spent learning the operation of buildings, learning how sun could be imported into our spaces to warm them, and we could reduce the amount of air conditioning that we use, that we could reduce the amount of heating needed in certain times of year, that we could put the right kind of landscaping in that created natural shade so that you didn't have to spike up your cooling in the summer. I learned all about that on the job. I did have to start from the ground level in sustainability departments at engineering firms. The first engineering firm I worked for didn't really have a sustainability department. They just had some people who were mostly interested in environmental design. So I came into that group, and by the time I left that engineering firm, I was leading our team. We were doing things like energy modeling, which is a really cool intersection between technology and building engineering, where you're actually creating a computer model that simulates what a building will do based on conditions outside. How much cooling does it need? How much heating does it need? And what could we do with the systems inside of it to help tweak it so that it uses a little less energy or a little less water? So those are a lot of the elements that I was learning across two engineering jobs. And thankfully, that is what led me to realize that the thing that I really liked most about learning about healthy buildings and sustainable buildings was that there's a connection between great buildings and sustained people, healthy people who can really do well in their jobs. So I did a lot of work thinking about what about our spaces made it conducive to doing great work, and how do people feel about their buildings in such a way that we could design them to enhance the experience. And so that's what I was mostly doing at my second job in an engineering firm, and it's what ultimately led me to a position with Facebook. And at Facebook, you know the front end of Facebook. You know the stuff that gets to our desktops every day, or laptops, excuse me, and our phones, and that help us interact with family members and friends around the world. But the back end is that there are a lot of people who make that system run. And we have 130 offices around the world. We are very excited to be continuing to grow. We're using a whole new dynamic with people working from home, which has been challenging. And what I get to do there is I'm the sustainability global lead, and that includes for all of our facilities that are offices, for our culinary team, and for our security teams, which includes our workplace designers. It includes a lot of people who help make the Facebook offices run. And so we work on a huge gamut of projects at Facebook. We really think about how you can build sustainably in a way that respects the community in which we build. We create partnerships with renewable energy providers that provide 100% of our electricity. So we are 100% sustainably run. We also look to opportunities for recycled water. We have the largest black water plant in California at the moment. I'm sure it will be surpassed. And it's a reclaimed water system, which is really interesting and challenging. We design most of our large buildings to, at minimum, a LEED Gold standard, but we're looking at well-being standards as well. So we're utilizing the Fitwel standard and the well standard, which are two different ways of evaluating how healthy and productive the people are, not just how efficient the building is. We've developed a sustainable standard for our culinary teams. So our cafes are run to a high sustainability level, and we're trying to do even more. We're trying to branch out and work with the vendors that we use to think about what they're supplying to Facebook. It's kind of being an in-between to say, okay, we know we can get the food that we need from you, but could you wrap it more sustainably? Could you make it so that we don't have landfill waste at all if we use your product? Can you give us reusable crates that you pack at your end and we unpack at our end, and then we send them back to you? We're working on the mileage program for people at Facebook who travel a lot for their positions. We're challenging the travel team to give us a reduction target. That is really to help people recognize that every flight you take has a huge carbon impact. And if Facebook is saying you need to take that trip, we're also asking employees to say, well, is there a more efficient way you could travel? Could you go by bus, or could you go by shuttle? Is there another way you could go? In Europe this year for their holiday party, that is last year, they were actually able to commit over 25% of the travel went by a huge boat to their big regional holiday event, which was a conference, work, and the holiday party. It's a really neat combination of challenges. It's not without the basic challenges, which is we need buildings and they have to be built, and sometimes building is unsustainable. So we're working on sustainability standards to make sure every building is built with healthy and sustainable materials. We have to power our buildings with energy from a variety of sources, but as I said, it's all renewably either built or offset. And we try to build solar panels on site wherever we can. Sometimes we're not the owner of our buildings. We build as a tenant inside of a larger space, and those are much harder to control. So we have certain challenges, but we're really excited. We are the second largest buyer of renewable energy in the United States, and we are the largest buyer globally of renewable energy. We are creating our own renewable energy projects all over the world. That is that we invest the money and we work together with a developer to build a new wind farm or a new solar farm. We are investing in small farms around the world to help bring us the food that we need. So we are investing in small farmers, and we are actually building our own farms in some of our locations. In Ireland specifically, we have both a farm and an apiary. So we have bees as well. We actually have bees in several sites around the world, which is very exciting. We have many other standards. I could point to a lot of them, but I think it would just come off as sort of a litany here of examples. So that's where we are now. Where we're going in the future is that I think we'll be making some very big carbon commitments this fall around the UN Climate Week, which is in September. And Facebook is a big part of that. And so we'll be partnering on the digital side. And then we are also going to be looking at net zero and sequestration projects. So carbon sequestration means that you build either projects or you use processes that absorb carbon and CO2 from the atmosphere. It doesn't just emit it and then offset it elsewhere, but rather it takes CO2 and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and pulls it back in. There are many, many ways to do that. More being invented every day, more to be invented for anyone on this call who's interested. There's a lot of space there for good work to be done. And I'm going to actually pause there and just see if there are questions and ask if there's anything in particular I should address.
Thanks, Julia. We've had one or two questions come in so far to the chat window, which I'll read to you. And if folks have other questions, please do type them in. I think you did start talking about this quite significantly already about Facebook's current sustainability policies and how you go about implementing those policies. I think how you go about it, I'd love to hear more, and one of our participants would love to hear more. I'm wondering, to add on to those questions, if you can speak a little bit to if it's part of your job at all, and if it is, what it looks like to think about social sustainability. I'm thinking about how when tech company offices have been built here in Pittsburgh, sometimes it can lead to unintended consequences like gentrification. What do some of those policies look like from a facilities side when you're talking about social sustainability?
Sure. I'll address the first one first on the development of environmental and sustainability types of policies. Um, there are a lot of ways that I can answer that. Only some of them fall within my jurisdiction. But when Facebook decides on a political stance, or on something that is effective for global policy, for example, to support the Paris Climate Agreement, there's a lot of work that goes into that. Not only do we have a policy team who help weigh in on why that's important, but partly myself and another director of sustainability at Facebook, we weigh in specifically to talk about the challenges associated with making sure that we can uphold policy like that, and the benefits to sort of forcing ourselves to get in line with such a good policy. So, for example, for the Paris Climate Agreement, excuse me, we are still in. So, no matter what happens at a federal level, we have taken it upon ourselves to act as though that's federally mandated, and we're just requiring ourselves to do it. So we're voluntarily meeting it. And that means a lot for our renewable standards. It also sets a good precedent. It shows that it's important to us. It should be important to our peers. And it's really a good thing for us in the long run. The way that we go about making those policies, aside from a ton of collaboration and sometimes working with the policy team, there are a couple of major things. The first one is that there's my counterpart for the data centers we have a lot to talk about in terms of how we use energy at Facebook. So he and I both work together on committing ourselves to different policies. We also look at the long-term benefits of how we think about the leadership role we want to have in the world. And that's what has led us to talking about carbon in real terms, setting science-based targets. All of these things are things that we verified that we could do internally first. Then we talk to our legal and policy teams to ensure we understand the liability and the risk associated with making these statements, and that we can follow through, and that we know how to third-party verify. That's to make sure that someone outside of our organization can look at the supporting evidence and shows, oh yes, Facebook did do that, because that's not something that we should do ourselves. Well, we should certainly check that we've done the right thing. But when you broaden that and your audience is bigger, you really generally need a third-party objective verifier to come look at the documentation, look at the evidence and say, yes, you guys did it, nice job. And almost every sustainability report that you'll see from any companies, you should look them up. They're very helpful. Those are generally third-party verified to ensure it's really accurate and not just a company itself trying to congratulate itself. So there are a lot of people involved in making those policies. It gets one step more complicated when we talk about social sustainability. We've been talking about social sustainability for a long time. Sometimes it has been well enacted depending on the community, and sometimes our community bonds have not been strong enough to show us the best way of enacting a real policy that is strict around upholding community sustainability. So in California, we've been building ties with communities that we're thinking about moving into for a long time. And it helps us to see what kind of substantial structural support we can lend to a community to ensure that we don't have the breakdowns that you typically see with things like gentrification. So for example, giving money directly to the city specifically targeted for library improvements, donating hotspots, especially for areas that are low income, making sure that we've made contributions to farmers market efforts, through our culinary program, that we package our the meals that are not served to Facebook communities, and we donate those directly to the community. So those are a lot of the efforts that we work on in every single location that we're in. Some of those get done after we've already moved in, and some of them are proactively developed before we move in. The building of the community ties has been really challenging in some locations, and I know that Pittsburgh definitely had some challenging elements with the Facebook office moving in. I think sometimes these things get conflated, and there are issues around having new development, period, and not necessarily about Facebook's new development. But we are an organization that really encourages our employees to be involved in the city, to give back to the city, to help with the community. And I know that not all of that can eliminate the negative and detrimental effects of gentrification. But there are a lot of policies in place that are there to encourage ground up investment, to make sure the community feels invested in, not just put upon. And so that's standard for everywhere we move into, but how it gets exacted out to the community definitely varies. And so I would say it's still a work in progress. We've grown really fast over the past couple of years. Some of those policies are crystal clear and executed well every time. Some of them have a lot of work still to go. And certainly social sustainability is on that list.
Thanks, Julia. That was a lot of things to answer at once, and you did it so gracefully. Thanks for sharing all of that. Feel free, folks, to enter more questions into the chat window. In the meantime, Julia, I'm wondering, are there ways that youth can engage with Facebook around sustainability efforts if they have a local office, or are there ways through any online engagement? How can we inspire more activism through any angles Facebook might have available?
That's a great question. Again, it's a big, diverse question when you think about our online platform at Facebook, which is very easy to engage with sustainability on, because obviously there are a lot of groups that are dedicated to good sustainability practices, especially things like Plastics Free Pittsburgh, and those kinds of organizations are fantastic, and they're really full of, action oriented work. Same thing with there are a couple of river cleanup groups that are really fantastic and active in Pittsburgh, and some others that really just help connect people. But on the corporate side, Facebook does a lot of community networking and community volunteer events, and that may be a way to get involved. I know that some of our offices have hosted field trips and that sort of thing, where you can just go get a tour of a Facebook building and talk to some of the engineers there and talk to some of the folks that are on the ground. Our sustainability presence in some of our cities is strong, and some of them there just isn't anyone necessarily on the sustainability team that sits in that office. Pittsburgh is one of those. So while Pittsburgh's offices were built to our sustainability standards, it's not easy to go in and sort of talk to someone directly about sustainability. We do have someone there who is a facilities lead who definitely would be interested in leading a conversation around sustainability at Facebook, because he knows the building very well. He's not on my team, but I work with him pretty regularly. So that's another avenue in. But in general, the other thing is that Facebook loves to do community-based events. And so if anyone is associated with an organization, a nonprofit, et cetera, or even a school, and wants to engage a little bit with the Facebook Pittsburgh office, or any of our other offices in most locations, they're always, all of the employees are looking for opportunities to get more involved in the community and to help out and to share their experience or build something, clean something, etc. So those events are always hosted by the site leads, and there's a site lead at every office that you can speak to about that. And it's a huge push. At Facebook, we see it as culture building. We see it as the identity of that office is shown by helping its community. So we really encourage every employee to bring up ideas for group outings. Pittsburgh office, I just follow as part of our internal platform, and they're constantly talking about cool Pittsburgh things that really didn't exist when I lived there. So it makes me jealous of all the cool things that Pittsburgh is doing these days. But thinking about the digital Three Rivers Arts Festival is something that I wouldn't have known anything about, but the Facebook employees saw it and picked it up and shared it around. And so there's a lot of opportunity to either engage inside of our offices or to have Facebook engage outside of our offices. So there's a lot that can be done. And with any specific sustainability projects, I'm happy to connect people if they're interested.
Thanks, Julia. That's a great invitation. The next question in the chat box is, in what ways do you promote sustainability awareness to the public?
This is a tricky one. It's not our forte. It's something, so sustainability awareness in general is something that Facebook has struggled with its identity on. Facebook as an organization touts itself as being a platform for engaging in any way that you can as somebody who logs into Facebook and can have a really good experience getting into any passion that you might have, which has meant that Facebook has been reticent or resistant to taking a really bold and public stance on a lot of things, for better and for worse. So our stance on sustainability in a public view has been that we're committed to 100% renewable energy. We are reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 80% this year, compared to a 2017 baseline. So really impressive work all in all. And we're doing all of this massive renewable energy investment. Talking about it has been a challenge for us, though, not because we don't want to talk about it, but because Facebook is asked to weigh in on election integrity and a lot of things that are very uniquely specific to Facebook. And there's been a lot of push for Facebook to bring its voice up against hate crimes online or hate speech or election integrity and elevating messages from groups like Black Lives Matter, elevating minority messages and making sure that people get equal voice. Those are very important, as is environmental sustainability. The challenge with environmental sustainability is Facebook isn't necessarily uniquely situated to address it. We are one of the key players who can play a big role. And so our public messaging hasn't been as loud, but we do have all of our information and some really great case studies available online that are all public. And so that's sustainability.fb.com. So you can find out all of that information there. And if there are opportunities for any one of us on the sustainability team to speak to a group, especially something like this, that's something we take advantage of. But we try, I think one of the reasons we don't do more is that we are not doing sustainability for a pat on the back. We're not trying to get press agencies to say, oh, look at this great thing Facebook is doing, because that's not the point of the program. The point of the program is to make the world better. And so as much as we would love to tout this really positive stuff we're doing, instead of getting hammered by some of the negative issues associated with elections and otherwise, it feels disingenuous, inauthentic to brag about doing our sustainability work, even though we know there's a tremendous value in educating the public. So we try to do more events like this and less big press events where we patted ourselves on the back.
Thanks, Julia. I imagine that's might be a tough balance to strike sometimes, and appreciate the importance of that. I'm wondering, what is the most challenging part of your job, and then what is the part of your job that brings you the most joy?
Oh boy. Whew. I think the most challenging piece, is that sustainability is inherently part of every person's life. But it is not necessarily part of their conscience. It's not necessarily something that everyone thinks about. And so that's a really tough balance because it means that everyone could do a part, but a lot of people don't think to. And I don't think there are many people who don't want to. But I think that a lot of the challenge associated with sustainability is that we have to make slightly different choices. And sometimes those choices are less convenient. So one thing that Facebook is really trying to do is make those sustainable choices more convenient. Make it the more obvious choice to pick up a reusable plate and not a compostable or disposable plate. Make it more obvious to grab a handful of snacks in a bulk container instead of taking a plastic wrapped version. Make our platform better by, this is a very crazy one, but you can write code that is more efficient for a server to compute, to make Facebook run as an online platform. You can do that. You can make your code more efficient so it takes less energy to run the Facebook homepage, the Facebook news feed, all of those parts that you read every day that you log into. Those are all built on tiny little minuscule pieces of code. If every single one is more sustainable, that helps cut down our overall energy load. So there are a lot of little pieces that all add up. And I think Facebook is working towards helping everyone recognize their part and not have it be an afterthought. So that's challenging, but when it works, it's very exciting. I was asked for the first time ever, as the director of sustainability, I got to present in our new hire orientation. And so I presented for the last, until we went to, on shelter in place and left our offices, I presented to thousands of newly hired employees. And that was tremendously rewarding because it meant that I got to educate every employee coming in. You know, they get all the important core values, mission statements, the importance of diversity. There are all these great presentations that go on in new hire orientation. And then they get sustainability, which is really, it shows the importance of it to Facebook. So that's been really rewarding. I will say the other super rewarding thing is working with our culinary team. Our culinary team is absolutely dependent on a healthy environment. So people get it, but a lot of people don't necessarily know what to do or how to influence Facebook employees around eating more sustainably. So they have committed to making 50% of all culinary options at all of our offices vegetarian or vegan. And I think probably most people on the call know that red meat is a huge source of CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions, so methane and CO2 for that matter. And eating a little bit less of it, even if it's just one day a week, goes a long way. So working with our culinary team, making the connections with small farmers, reducing the travel miles spent on our food, all of that has been super rewarding. So that has been a surprise, and there's another part of my job that I was less qualified for, but I've learned a lot on the job about food sustainability, and it's been wonderful.
That's awesome. I know, like, you're blowing my mind with thinking about like coding sustainability and the energy that servers use. As someone who only ever took like computer science 101 Java and in like the last year of college, I had never thought about computer science and its connection to sustainability. So awesome. So cool to hear about all of this. Let's see, time check. We have about 10 minutes left. So if folks have more questions, I see one that just popped up. What are the best sources to learn more about food sustainability? And then maybe also, Julia, what are some of your favorite sources in general to learn more about your field these days?
Sure. Wow. These are tremendous questions. Food sustainability is a really interesting one to learn more about. This is an area that is just ripe for study. The food puns are just, sorry, they're all an accident, but it is ripe area for study. One of the best ways to study food sustainability is to talk to anyone you know who might be involved in food is going to be a tremendous source for understanding how the food system works. I didn't understand all of the parts of the big food puzzle that there are, and actually understanding more of that from talking to people who cook. for a living has been tremendous. Understanding how many middle people there are who are helping connect people between food and getting it cooked is pretty incredible. I also love reading Michael Pollan, and anything he's written has been really tremendous. The Food Rules and Botany of Desire. Botany of Desire is one of the best books I think that's ever been written. They're traditional ones, and then following certain chefs online on Instagram has been tremendous. Not to tout our own platform here, but Jose Andres does really great work all around the world. He's a tremendous chef. He cares about the environment, but he also cares about people. So he makes sure that he and his team are available for when disaster strikes around the world. He makes sure that people have hot, nutritious food available to them, not just snack packs from FEMA. He does a really tremendous job. So Jose Andres is a great one. Dominique Crenn is the most highly decorated Michelin female chef in the world. She's a cancer survivor. She's just incredible. And she writes a lot about the world. Alice Waters is another just classic person to read anything from. She's got several cookbooks. There's a lot you can learn from cookbooks themselves. Mark Bittman is a great one who's written a lot. Dan Barber, another terrific chef who's written lots of great cookbooks, but everything he does has to do with food sustainability. Those are some of my favorites. There are way more. In general, some of my favorite resources to understand more about sustainability, in my world, I read a lot around online magazines for sure, and even Architectural Digest and that sort of thing, just to understand some of the trends that are going on. But I also try to extend outside of those worlds and look at, for instance, things that are digitally oriented, like Wired magazine, because a lot of the efficiencies that I think about are not perfectly built in the environmental science world. It's about using a tool that exists somewhere else and applying it with environmental thought in mind, or how does it affect the natural environment. So I really try to branch out when I'm reading work in the sustainability field. So although I have lots of more traditional suggestions, I think branching out and thinking about things like Wired, something like Wired magazine, but lots of others are just good ways to start. I certainly could think of more. I'm sort of on the spot a little bit, but a couple of other ones I could mention. Just going to the website around the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I think, is tremendous. It's the first slide as this deck is part of Chatham's program, so I'm sure that you all already know about it. I'm working on the circular economy. That's another area that I didn't really touch on here. The best source of information you could stay on for days is the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They are the leaders in providing education around the circular economy. For anyone who doesn't know much about it, it's the idea that we could eliminate waste from the processes we use every day. The processes, the products, it's about thinking about why there is waste and what are the ways that we could eliminate it by thinking more holistically about the upstream and downstream effects of what we use. So those are a couple. I'm sure I could come up with more and better ones.
So the next question is, are schools teaching information about how coding can be more sustainable, or is this something that only Facebook is working on?
It's a great question. I'm going to take this in two different directions. The first one is there is like much of sustainability, and I really want to reiterate this, sustainability often has an intersection or a direct overlap with another benefit. When you use less energy, you often have to spend less money, right? You pay for your utilities. So when you use a little bit less of it, it's got two benefits. One, there's less environmental degradation associated with it. And the other is that it's less expensive to run the cooling in your building, for example. So when there are overlapping benefits, there's a very easy pull to make sure that that information goes out, because you can approach people with many different perspectives in the world and still get them to do the right thing. efficient coding is another example of that. When code is written in an efficient manner, it's faster. It actually responds better on the server's end to get that information back to the people who are using it. For anyone who's not sure how coding works, when you type in a search or a query in your news feed on Facebook or in a Google search bar, you're sending a question to the server, and then it has to ping back immediately so that when the page opens for your news results from your search, it goes as quickly as possible, like it already knew what you were going to say. And the faster that goes, the better experience it is for you. So Facebook's absolute value is in making sure that you have what you need as soon as you need it. And when you write more efficient code, it responds better on that end, which means that really good approaches to this kind of code, when you get to this level, does teach this. They teach it not necessarily about the energy spend, but eventually it does get to that, because really advanced coders understand how the backend or how the server is responding to the type of code they wrote. So the more direct they can write it, the better and more efficient that code is written, the better the performance of the exchange that they're making, the result. So I would say schools probably are not necessarily teaching this exact concept, but it is a valuable concept. And I think that schools are understanding more and more about how to teach it. And then the second part, what was the second part? Coding. Oh, Facebook, that Facebook is working on. So one really cool thing that Facebook did is that we figured out a way to cool our data centers in a manner that was not, it was unique. We invented it. It's a way of, every data center for the most part is cooled the same way. If you're ever wondering about cooling systems, however many of you might be wondering about them, there are typically two ways that we cool, and this is being advanced on every day, but we typically either cool air, and we send air through ducts and other mechanisms in a building, or we chill water, and we get it down to the coolest point we can while still being able to pump it, so it can't turn to ice, but it can be cooled a lot. Cooling water is much, much, much more efficient than using air, significantly. It basically can't be compared. And so every data center, whether it's Google's or Facebook's or anyone else, they're all water cooled. But Facebook figured out a way to evaporatively cool, which is just a very efficient way of cooling, that allows us to, one, reuse the water more quickly, because we get the cooling rejecting the heat more quickly, but we reabsorb the heat and we use a heat exchanger to turn it back into cooling energy. And in doing this, we use 80% less water than almost any other data center ever built. When we invented that, this was 3 years ago, we open sourced the design. So that is, we shared it to every single one of our partners across all of the industries. Google, we gave it to everybody, because there was no reason for us to have the single approach to this, because all data centers have the same problem, which is that they need a massive amount of cooling to keep the servers cooled down. So that's uniquely Facebook, but we shared it out.
That's awesome to hear that such a unique and important solution is like treated as open information, when the fate of humanity and the globe and impacts on climate change is concerned. It's really heartwarming to hear that protection of intellectual property in the tech world is not more important than sharing those sorts of things. I wish we had hours, and also we're so grateful that you've given us the hour of your time that you have. I know I've learned a lot, and there's been comments about folks finding similar information fascinating. So thanks so much for sharing your time with us today, Julia. We really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone that had a chance to join us for the call today. And we look forward to seeing you on a future Sustainable Career webinar. Thanks so much, Julia.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. This is great.
Have a good day, everybody. Bye.